We are in one of the Appalachian oak pine forests of New Hampshire with Dr. Cline. So I have a question for you. Why did you decide to work and open the Tin Mountain Conservation Center?
Well, I didn't open it, but I came in after it was open and we expanded it quite a bit. I guess I liked it for a number of reasons. It was small enough that we had a really good chance to grow it, make it do more. And the other part was it had an education component, and my background's in research, but I had some exposure to education. And what I liked about the programs at Tin Mountain was they were multi-session. It wasn't like when we worked with schools, we'd come in and not just one day, we'd come in for many days and work with the same group. So it was that repeated exposure to students, I think. I like that education part of it. I like the fact there was a lot of room for growth there. We've expanded quite a bit. We've got research going on now. We do a bunch of summer camps. So it's a lot of variety. And it's something new every day.
That's great.
Thanks, Emma. When I went to undergraduate school, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I worked for a summer with a veterinarian and realized I wasn't cut out for that. I like plants a little better. They didn't make as much noise, they didn't smell bad for the most part. I just found them really interesting, and I was always doing things outdoors when I was a youngster. I hunted and fished and all that kind of stuff, and camped and hiked, so it seemed like a natural way to go. So then I went to graduate school in Colorado and got into forestry, but I didn't get my training in forestry. I'm more of a forest ecologist, and I studied tree physiology, and I studied a lot of the processes that go on under the ground with the roots. Symbioses, called mycorrhizae.
Okay.
Like lichens that we talked about.
Why do you like working at the Tin Mountain Conservation Center?
The Tin Mountain Conservation Center. I like working there. First of all, I like the people I work with. I couldn't ask for a better bunch of people. And the variety of things that we do. I think from the community programs, we do courses for adults and kids. We have a school program. We have camps. You know what else I like is we have 1,200 acres of forest land that we do research on, but we also manage the forest in a sustainable way. So we use that as a way of educating by example. So it allows me to do some forestry work, it allows me to do a little research, I get to do some education, and I get to run the place. So what else could I ask for? It's a really good job. Thanks, Eli.
What's your favorite thing to do in the forest?
Favorite thing to do in the forest? Well, there's a bunch of things. I don't know whether I can name them exactly as one. I like to go bird watching. And right now, this time of year in the spring, there's all the migratory birds, the warblers and so forth coming back. So I like bird watching, but almost as much as bird watching is I like wildflowers. There's a lot of places in the forest that are really unique and have unique flowers coming up, and it's so much fun to go out and find that really rare plant, maybe a rare orchid or something. At Tin Mountain we have one of the federally endangered plants, the small world begonia, so I like doing that. I like hiking. There's nothing I don't like doing in the forest, I guess.
Why did you want to get your PhD?
Why did I want my PhD? I guess I liked research. After I did my bachelor's and master's, I felt like there was more to do. I wanted also perhaps to do some teaching at the college level, and you have to pretty much have to have a PhD to do that. And I guess the major reason was I wanted to do research when I got out of school, and I did that. I went to work with one of the big timber companies and did a bunch of research in their lab in different parts of the country. So the research end of it drew me to that. And, you know, you can get a PhD in a lot of different fields, but I happen to be in the research end. So that's why. I like research. I like learning about new things. So.
What do you like to learn about
Besides forests? Well, as I mentioned, birds. I like birds. I did a lot in the soils. The fungi. I like fungi a lot. They're good to eat as well. Yeah, and we talked about symbioses between algae and fungi forming lichens. What I studied mostly when I was getting my PhD, there's a similar symbiosis between fungi in the soil and roots, little roots. When the fungi get their food source from the trees through the roots, and then the fungi absorb lots of nutrients and send them to the roots. And all trees essentially have that symbiosis. I studied trees. I grew up in Ohio, in northeastern Ohio, and I went to undergraduate school in Ohio, and I studied trees there. And those trees were similar to this, but with some differences. The soils were we call briny, I guess, a little higher pH than we have here, not as a city. And then I went out to Colorado, and I worked there, and that's where I did my research. My advanced degrees. I was out there for 6 years. And then I went down to Mississippi. And I was in Mississippi for a couple of years, and that was a lot of new things that I'd never seen before. And then I went up to Bangor, Maine. I was up there for quite a while, and they closed that research center, and they sent me down to their corporate research center, and there I did a lot of lab work, but it was still growing, mostly working on tree seedlings and genetics, so I was down there. And then I ended up going to work for Maine Audubon Society, and there I did a little research, but I did a lot of policy work, so I was in Augusta, and we passed the Maine Forest Practices Act. It was something that our attorney and I wrote. We got passed it, and it was some regulations on how big hotbeds could be and things like that. And then I taught a little bit at the University of Maine and St. Joseph's College, and then I went to work for Tin Mountain about 15 years ago.
Okay. So what was your favorite place to study trees?
Favorite place to study trees? I'd have to say I like it here in New Hampshire, up in the Mount Washington Valley.
Thanks for your time. So what is the current science research at your nature center focusing on?
Oh, nice question, Iris. What we're looking at, we've got a couple of things going. One is we're looking at areas that have been cut for timber harvest, and not cut hard, what we call selection cut. So there's a lot of trees left, but even though there's a lot of trees left, we've changed the habitat quite a bit. So we're using birds, which birds show up in cut areas and uncut areas, to kind of find out how much we've disturbed it, and then we're looking to see how long it takes for the cut forest to get back to what it was like before it was cut. Does that make sense? Here's another thing we're doing. We're studying brook trout, and a lot of people tend to pull wood out of streams because it looks cleaner and everything, but that's not good for brook trout. Brook trout like to have pools. There's riffles, those are running water, and then there's pools and streams. And what we're doing is we're trying to create more pools and less riffles in these smaller streams. And that way, those streams can hold more native brook trout. These aren't stock, these are native brook trout. And they're smaller streams, and the trout we're looking at are anywhere from 1 inch or 2 to 7 or 8 inches. So we're putting wood in the streams to make little dams and hold up water, make pools, to increase trout habitat. We call it brook trout habitat enhancements. And so we study those, and we go and sample the fish to see how well it's done. We've been doing this for 5 years now, and it seems like it's making a big difference. We have more fish and bigger fish.
So, from your studies, what are you planning to work on next?
What are we working on now? You know what we're working on next? Everybody, including myself, like these flashy, we call them neotropical migrants, the warblers. They're really pretty. Little yellow birds, orange birds, green birds, lots of black and flashy stuff on them. We've got to study those to study our resident birds, like the chickadee, the nuthatch, brown creepers. These birds are here all year round. So I'm pretty excited about doing that. We want to know what they're doing, how big their ranges are. So we'll be doing a lot of bird banding and point counts. So you see them in the winter and they seem like there's lots of them around. But when all the birds, like now, when the birds are coming back from the south, they make up, in many places they don't make any more than 6% of the birds out there. So there's not a lot of them out there. There's just the only birds you see in the winter. So we want to learn a little bit more about their habitat.
Okay, thank you.
So, was science your favorite subject in school?
Oh, wow. My favorite subject in school. When I was your age, I liked science. Math was interesting. You know, I really like art. I like art. I still try to dabble at that once in a while. But you know what I also like is, and I still like history a lot as well. So I don't know. Science was in there, but history and art were pretty strong. And yeah, I think science as I got older it became more important. And when I got into college, yeah, science by far was what I liked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. What are your hobbies?
What are my hobbies? Well, I mean, messing around with trees, I guess is no. I like what I like to do. I like to hike. I like to canoe. I like to Nordic ski. I broke my ankle Nordic skiing this last winter. I like to play guitar and dabble around with the watercolors. So yeah, I mean the non-tree stuff. That's what
Do you enjoy about your job?
what I enjoy about my job. I like it. It's somewhat flexible. You know, I can, as long as I get the work done, I can take time off when I need to. There's always something new to do, and I guess we've grown a lot since I've gotten there. We've built a new building. We obtained some timberlands. We bought a school bus last year, so we can take groups around. We're building a cabin for interns, our research interns, our college interns that come and help us. So I guess what I like most about it is something new and exciting every darn day.
What are some things that you think our sign in the oak pine forest should highlight?
Your sign in the oak pine forest. Well, I think one thing you should do is list the trees that are present. I think you should list what plants are in the understory. I think that if you put something in about traditional use of the resource, what were the trees used for? We know like the white oak is great for barrels and ships. White pine is great for masts. A lot of the trees here, when they cleared it in the early 1600s when it was settled here, a lot of the trees had to go just to pasture animals. Many of them were used for firewood, you know, 30 or 40 cords of firewood a year for a house. Fireplaces were not very efficient. Potash was another thing they'd make, and charcoal. So I talk about some of the uses of it. You might also talk about some of the wildlife that use the oak pine forest, if there's any unique wildlife or wildflowers that you might see in the area. So that's what I would do.
Thank you. What makes the Appalachian oak pine forest so special?
I think the Appalachian oak pine forest is quite common south, down in the Atlantic seaboard. But up here, this is about the northern extent of it. It stretches a little bit north of here. So there's not a lot of it here, and when something is in short supply, it's somewhat scarce. So, and I think when you look at adaptations, even though it's the same forest down in the mid-coast, or mid-Atlantic states, up here, oftentimes when you're on the edge of a forest, the plants and trees have some special adaptations, maybe for frost hardiness, and it's good on the genetic level. It's really good to have these populations and preserve those populations on the edges. Other than that, it's great wildlife. I mean, there's certain wildlife that love this forest because the acorns are here, and it's a rich supply of what we call mast. That's any edible fruit. The shagbark hickory has mast. The pine provides good cover. So, yeah, it's important.
Thank you. How do humans impact the forest in a negative way?
Impact the forest, they affect it or influence it, but impact is not a verb. That's a noun.
Okay.
How do humans influence or affect the forest?
Yeah, what would be different if the forest, if we didn't have humans, if there weren't humans?
If there weren't humans here, the forest structure would be a lot different. In here, you've got some bigger trees, and it's starting to become an uneven age forest. But I think you'd find larger trees for one part, and the uneven age nature of the forest would be quite a bit different. Remember, we saw a lot of invasive species in here. We saw the Japanese honeysuckle. Certainly they planted the Scots pine and the Norway spruce over there. So we've had quite a bit of influence on it here. So there's a couple ways.
How do trees and plants compete for nutrients, sunshine, and water?
How do they compete? Wow. Well, they have adaptations that allow them to compete in different ways. We talked earlier about pioneer trees, the real sprinters. They have very fast growth rates. So they put out a lot of foliage quickly. How do they get there to begin with? They have very small, light seeds that allow them to blow into an area versus acorns, which need to be carried into the area. If you look at these trees when they're growing close together, certain species tend to spread out. You look at the oak trees up there, and they have this what they call deliquescent form, and they kind of exclude other trees around them because they have these long branching, spreading crowns that shed light on them and suppress the other trees. Some trees in the root system, they produce little kind of chemicals that inhibit the germination of other plants. That's called allelopathy. And so that's another strategy that not all plants have, but some have. And you know, if you look at different sites, like fertility or water availability, some trees have root systems that can sink deep on really droughty soils and capture water there. Others on wet soils, they have cells that have ways of getting air even though their roots are in saturated soils with not much air. There's a lot of different ways. We could go on for hours and hours.
All right.
What are the different layers of the forest?
What are the different layers of the forest? Wow, that's an excellent question, because that all has to do with what we call forest structure, and that's just anything you see around you. And the layers of the forest are really important, and they provide essentially homes at different levels for different animals that use different parts of the forest. There's a whole set of birds that live on the ground and only a couple feet up, and others that live in the mid-canopy, and some that live way up the top. So the different layers here, I would look at the mineral soil. On top of the mineral soil, you've got the forest duff and the humus layer. That's what we see laying on the ground, all the branches and needles and leaves. Then you have the ground cover, which we talked about, Canada mayflower and some herbaceous plants. Then the shrub layer, which unfortunately has some of the Japanese honeysuckle in it, but it also has, I think there's some sassafras in here, and there's a bunch of shrubs that don't get very tall. And then, like this cedar here, that's grown up. That's what we call the subcanopy, and it's just below the canopy, but above the shrub layer, and then you have the canopy up at the top. So those are the different layers as you go from the top to the canopy, down to the ground, and then into the ground. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
All right.
People use the forest as a resource.
How do people use the forest? Well, lots of different ways, I guess. The most obvious, I suppose, is for wood. For lumber and firewood or whatever we might use the wood for. Chips for burning to make electricity. But we also use it certainly for seeking solace and tranquility, recreation, bird watching. But those, I guess, recreation, watching wildlife, and as a commodity, wood.
And what makes the resources special?
What makes the forest resource special? I guess the biggest thing is if you manage it in a sustainable fashion, it's renewable. So it can go on forever if we take care of the soil that it's growing on, and we make sure that there's adequate habitat for all the wildlife that use that forest. And I would say that you also set some forests aside that you never cut, so that you have examples of that as well. Habitat for wildlife that require that kind of forest.
Thank you for your time. What does the food web here look like, and how do these plants and animals make it?
How do they they make up the food web. Well, everything here is tied in a way. So you look at your primary producers, which are green plants, right? So there's a whole host of animals out there that live off the plants directly. I mean, there's grouse that are eating buds. There are deer that are eating buds and branches and succulent vegetation as it comes up. There are, we mentioned partridge. Did we say partridge that eat buds? Yes. So think about then who eats the partridge. Maybe a fox, a red fox around here, or a coyote, or a bobcat. And so it's all those connections, and we haven't even talked about, all right, when things die, then you've got the microbes that are eating the decaying dead animals. You also have plants and animals that are feeding off of, that live in the soil, that are eating small macroinvertebrates and so forth that live in the soil, little insects. So that whole web there, we've got the birds, the animals, which are the secondary, not producers, they're the consumers. So I don't know whether that makes any sense or not, but it's pretty complex to cover in a lot of detail, but that's kind of just a quick overview.
So what is the life cycle of a forest?
Life cycle of the forest. Well, as we know, some of these trees, the shade only grows for 400 years on a good site. And then there are other trees, the pioneer trees, that are short-lived. They only grow to be 70 or 80 years old. So So they all play a part in the life cycle, and the life cycle of forests, I guess it starts when there's a major disturbance, big standard placing disturbance. Like fire, essentially all the trees we see, it knocks them all down, they start again. And that process is called forest succession. Forest succession starts with occupy the site for a short period of time. When they die, shade dog trees, grow up and they'll go on until there's another major disturbance. So that's kind of the life cycle of the forest in a nutshell, in an acorn shell.